I know it is incredibly rude to interrupt the credits, but just to make sure that we have enough and as much time as possible with this extraordinary production designer, I'm going to cut off now these credits and want to welcome. And Wynn, could you stay back? I just want to make this, make sure to introduce you the way you have to be introduced, because it's an incredible honor for me that now we have the production design of the film here. And I just want to really briefly say that his career has been spanning over the last 40 years. It all began with a small film with Spike Lee in 1986, She's Gotta Have It, and which led to a long-standing collaboration with Spike Lee, films like Malcolm X, Do the Right Thing, The Five Bloods, and many, many more. He worked with a lot of other great filmmakers, Ron Howard, Tim Burton, Robert Townsend, Harold Ramis, Robert De Niro as a director, and had made many, many films. I'm just going to name a few because there's too many. Wag the Dog, Analyze This, Mars Attacks, To Wong Fu, A Beautiful Mind, Shaft, King Richard, Hidden Figures, for which he received many, many accolades, and has received also the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Art Directors Guild. Last year has received a long 5-week retrospective at the MoMA in 2021. And I'm really, really, really excited that he's now here. Please let's have a huge round of applause for Wynn Thomas. We're just going to put on the headset really quick so we can hear you. And as Wynn said earlier, this is really also supposed to be a conversation. So please, whether you have questions to Cinderella Man.
Yeah, and bring it the board. Do you want to sit?
Yeah, I'm gonna sit. Where do you want me to sit?
You can sit right next to me.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. I'll sit. Hi. I hope you enjoyed the movie. I think it's one of my favorites. I always say to people, when people ask me what my favorite movie is, I always say, well, I try not to choose amongst the children. But this is one of my favorites. So I know we can start with you.
Well, as I said, Wynn, I'm really excited that you are here from your home of New York, here in Vienna, and that you're going to talk to us about Cinderella Man specifically, but also about your long-spanning career and the role of production design in cinema.
Mm-hmm.
And I give the microphone to you, whether you wanna.
No, I think okay. Well, I know we're going to talk about the film. I think initially, when I was thinking about this, I know I'm talking to a wide variety of talent in the room, directors and designers. I wanted to start off, when I was thinking about today, I wanted to start off by telling you another story. Let me see if I can bring up these images. Early on, after Spike and I finished Do the Right Thing, we did a movie called Mo Better Blues. And it's a story about a jazz musician and his relationship with women and his relationship with the people that he's working with. And it was a very big deal for us because we were going to be working with Denzel Washington. And this was the first act star to work with Spike. And it was the first time that we actually had a trailer for a star. And it was a big deal because we were going to have to build the set. We were going to have to build the nightclub. And the nightclub was called Beneath the Underdog. And nightclubs back, I think nowadays, jazz clubs in particular, were in basements, and they were very dark, and low ceilings. And so I had my initial conversations with Spike, and one of the things, what happened for me is that, you know, back in the early days with Spike, Spike would pour his heart and soul into the script and then would allow me to interpret that material. So essentially I would be forming the concept in which we would be working within, okay? That's the process. And what Spike would do in our early meetings would talk about what was important to him. And then I would go off, do my research, and come back and give him what I thought the concept of the show should be. So with More Better Blues, I really felt, for me, it was like a 1950s, 1960s movie musical, big Hollywood movie musical. And what I decided to do, and what I went to him and said, what I want to do here is treat it like a 1950s, 1960s movie musical. So instead of putting it in a basement, I wanted to put it in this 2-story, big, beautiful nightclub. And I think the advantage of doing this is that it would allow us to have a wider variety of shots when we were making the film, and would give us a bigger variety of things to do. And also, it would allow us to pay homage to the jazz people like Miles Davis and all these people from the 1960s. And the thing is, what I said to him, in addition to changing the physical world, this would have a huge impact on the costumes, okay? And because what I was suggesting is that all the movie was a contemporary film for the time. We could make it look like we could mix it up and have a little fun with it, and make it into like a 1950s, 1960s musical. So Ernest Dickerson was the cinematographer. He had been working with us on all the jobs. So the team that we had been working with from the very beginning, Ruth Carter was there, very famous. She's now a very famous costume designer. His editor, his whole team was there, because essentially what we were doing was making a movie a year. Now I'm telling you all this because are the images okay? So I wanted to show you. Maybe when you can full screen it. Oh, I can do that by the green. Yeah, okay. So that was the cast, right? This was the exterior of the club, Beneath the Underdog. This was my initial sketches. And so I designed this club that had a skyline around the top of the club. And the whole idea was to be able to change the mood of the club depending on the emotional mood of the scene, okay? So that's what it looked like. These are different shots. And the whole idea is that you could change the mood in the sky depending on how you lit the skyline. So that's looking back towards the end, back. And this was I showed the ceiling because I had to hide the lights, the cinematographer's lights, when we were doing wide shots. So these were sliding panels. And this was just an example of the coloring, okay? Show curtain, show curtain. And again, I'm showing you these pictures of the actors because Again, the movie took place in the 1990s, but it felt like a period film. Okay. The reason I'm telling you this story is because the movie came out and it got fairly good reviews. And the New York Times review said, Ernest Dickerson has brought Technicolor back to the movies. Not the production designer, Ernest Dickerson. So I wanted to start this conversation because most people have no idea what it is the production designer is doing. Everybody else gets credit for it. The cinematographer, the director, they give prop people the credit for it, but most people have no clue as to what we do. So I just wanted to start our conversation off with that most people have no clue. So, but the production designer is the only person on the job that takes the writer's words and turns them into concrete images. No one else does that. The director doesn't do it. The cinematographer doesn't do it. That is the function of the production designer. And I have some notes here which I need to read from you. And one of them says, the job of the production designer is to take the writer's words and turn them into concrete images. We do this by rewriting the script in visual terms. And no one else does this job. Okay? Okay. No one else. Everybody else gets credit for it, but that's the job that we do.
I think you're hitting on a real painful truth about production design and the role in cinema and the recognition. But then let me ask you, how did you find out what a production designer does, and you found out that that is what you want to do? Like, how was your origin story into production design?
I started out in the theater. I grew up in Philadelphia, and as a teenager, I saw Tennessee Williams' Summer and Smoke on television, and it had a profound impact on me. And there was something very moving and emotional about the story. And so as a result of that, I must have been 13, 14 years old when I saw this film. I was a big reader. I went to the library and I started reading all these plays. And then I knew that I wanted to work in the theater, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. So my sister, I had an older sister who thought she wanted to be an actress. And there was a theater company in Philadelphia called Society Hill Playhouse. And I encouraged her to go and audition for this company, okay, because she was older. And I told her, I said, look, you need to do a scene, you need to do an audition scene from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Now imagine being 14 years old and knowing about Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. If those people who are theater geeks will understand what that means. Anyway, I'm going to give you a short version of the story. My sister went and auditioned for this theater company. She ended up getting in. And as a result, I ended up going to work at this theater company, initially starting off as an usher. But I ended up spending my whole entire teenage life there from 14 to 18. And I ended up doing everything there, acting in shows and starting to design things. But I spent my entire teenage life there. And when I applied in high school, I was an art major. And when I had to decide, I loved art and I also loved theater, so I decided to become a set designer. So I went to college for stage design. Worked in the theater came out of college, worked in the theater, painted scenery, came back to Philadelphia, painted scenery, worked in small theater companies there. And then at the age of 25, I went to New York City to design for a theater company called the Negro Ensemble Company. Okay, which is a very famous theater company. It was a playwrights company and a actors company. And the company would be putting on shows for 6 or 8 months, and I became their resident set designer. There's a little side story that I tell here because started designing for them, and there was an actor who had auditioned for the company that year but did not get in. But it turns out that this actor had very good carpentry skills, and that I ended up hiring this actor to build my sets. And that actor was Samuel L. Jackson. Okay, so anyway, I spent my time in New York designing off-Broadway theater companies and designing regional theater, and it was a great and very satisfying life, but I was very poor. So we had to take, we have a union exam, we have a union that we have to belong to in order to work in television and film. I took that union test and eventually got in, and that allowed me to pursue film work, which took me a long time to break in because no one wanted to hire me because I only had theatrical experience. I'm not going to tell you the long version of the story, but I volunteered for my first job. And that I volunteered, I worked my way in. Again, it's a very long story, but I'm going to give you the short version because we don't have a lot of time. I volunteered. I met the production designer. The movie was called The Cotton Club, being directed by Francis Ford Coppola, and the production designer was a man named Dick Silbert. I met Dick Silbert. I spoke to him aggressively, and I said, look, I want to come volunteer for you. And he said, all right, you can come and work for me for free, but there's no more positions available in the art department. However, my very first day, again, this is a short version of the story, a job became available, and I got hired on my very first day of working on the Cotton Club. And that job, I was initially hired for 2 weeks. 2 weeks turned into 6 months. And that's how my film career began. And the great thing about working on this film is that I was building models that I would take down and give to Francis Ford Coppola, who would talk to me. I mean, imagine Francis Ford Coppola, I mean, you know. And it was a fantastic job. And the thing that was great about it is that by working, Dick Silbert was one of the best production designers in the country at that moment. And the great thing about working for him is that when I finished that Cotton Club, whenever I was applying for another job, he would pick up the phone and call that production designer and tell them to hire me. So as a result of that, I ended up working on big budget Hollywood films as an assistant art director for a couple years. And then very briefly, what happened was I was working on a movie called Beat Street, which was a breakdance film. And a young man came in to interview for the assistant to the directing job on that film. And he was a recent graduate of NYU. And he came in to interview for the job, and he stopped by the art department because he had a young woman who he went to school with as a PA in the art department. And that person was Spike Lee. And that's how I met Spike. And when he came into the art department, he saw me, he says, well, I didn't know there were any black people doing this. I said, yeah, I'm doing it. And as a result, you know, there was an immediate connection. And as a result of that connection, we stayed in touch for the next couple of years. And then a couple of years later, we made She's Gotta Have It. So that's a very short version of a very long story.
And if I may add to Spike's surprise that an African-American person is working in the art department, that is also something USA back then was not really exposed to that. And you are celebrated also as the first African-American production designer in cinema. And so the idea of how to break into cinema is already extremely difficult, but then considering the United States back then in the 80s, maybe because I think it's so fresh in our heads, let's talk about Cinderella Man. And it is an extraordinary piece. You propelled us back into the 1930s. And the crazy thing is you shot basically in the town that you're living in. You shot the town you're living in, New York, but you didn't shoot in New York.
That is correct.
Mostly in Canada.
That's correct.
And dressed up with fake cars and period street cars and lights and made Madison Square Garden so believable.
Yeah, I'm just going to if I can get this back here. Oops, how do I get that? Oh, there you go. Let's see if I can bring Cinderella Man up here. Okay. Ron Howard, Cinderella Man. Is that all right? Do we do it? Do we do it? Thanks. It is? I don't know what that means.
Maybe once in a while, I or you will just touch the touchpad to keep
Oh,
it.
just to keep it from
Yeah,
going
yeah,
away.
from falling.
Okay. So this was my second film with Ron Howard. The first was A Beautiful Mind, which was a great opportunity to work with that. It was my first film with Russell Crowe as well. And working with Ron is a fantastic opportunity. It's a fantastic job. But again, the process, I think most people don't, the mythology in the business is that the director knows everything. This is a myth. This is not true, okay? And so the director, and I think part of what our process is in our early meetings is to go and talk to the director and to find out what's important to him or her. Because to find out what they want to do with the project. That's what those early meetings are about. And then you go back and you begin to formulate your concept. And then you come back, you talk to the director about what you think your concept is going to be. The director approves that concept. And then that concept becomes available to everyone working on a film. And then everyone is supposed to work within the frameworks of that concept, okay? On Cinderella Man, so I just want to show you something here. These are a couple of, Braddock's character lives in North Bergen, New Jersey. This is what it looks like in real time, okay? Hey. Okay, that's what it looks like for real. And when we were shooting the film in Toronto, because that's what it looks like for real, okay? Nice, and you know, those are all very, that's kind of lovely, nice neighborhoods, right? This is a film, for me, the thing is, I had my initial talks with Ron. The reason we were going to Toronto was because the arena where we wanted to do the boxing scenes was available. Maple Leaf Gardens was available. So we could shoot the boxing sequences there. That's why we were there. So initially, I had my locations person. Now, I need to step back for a second. You go and do research, right? So the great thing about research is that it will confirm what you have in your head, or it will inspire you. So when you're doing the thing about the Depression, when you're, you know, what I do as a designer is that I will put together files for every single scene in the film and put images together for each set, okay? So while I was doing research, the thing about the Depression is that it's mostly our sense memory of the Depression is through black and white photographs. And as a result of that, I knew that I would want to make the movie fairly monochromatic, okay? Now, now the other thing is that what I think people don't know, I'm sorry to be jumping around here, the locations department is part of the art department. The locations, everybody thinks the locations department works for the director. This is not true. This is another myth. The locations department is, on the first months of the job, works directly for the production designer. They get their instructions from the production designer. Locations department never talks on my jobs, never talks to the director, because I'm putting the look of the film together and they are taking their instructions from me, okay? But they're a vital part of the process because they are helping me, the production designer, put the look of the picture together. So they're a very part of my they're a key collaborator for me. So initially, we were trying to find a whole bunch of images like what you just saw. But I kept thinking, I kept seeing these black and white photographs, and I kept saying, you know, I want, as you could see, normally what I wanted to do was find something where I could enhance the story. So I asked them to start looking for courtyards. So I need to advance through this. So I'm going to go through this very quickly. Sorry. And they ended up finding, sorry, I'll come back to some of this other stuff. They ended up finding the courtyard that you saw in the film. And what happened was there were only a few porches. But I like the idea of the courtyard because you could, not only were you telling the story about the Braddocks, but you could see how other people were living. And when I initially found this courtyard, all of the bricks were red. But what I decided to do was to come back in and to build more porches, because what I wanted from an emotional point of view. There's a moment there where Renee comes out and it looks like the world's about to collapse on her. That's intentional. That's what I wanted to do. But I also came back in and I painted the bulk of this gray. And the reason I did that is because, again, our sense memory of the Depression is black and white, from black and white photographs. Now, initially, now the thing is here, from a conceptual point of view, because again, this is all part of my concept, I did not want to do a traditional house with plaster walls, okay? I felt, there's a thing here that we did. Okay, just want to come over here for a second. Oops, it's turned the wrong way. Yeah, can you, yeah, thanks. Anyway, there's some writing on this. Yeah, oops. Okay, so I don't know who, to the designers in the room, this is what we have. I'm getting rid, let's get rid of the mystery. Color, line, texture. These are the tools that we have to service the metaphor, the themes of the movie. Color, line, texture, you're going to use that to service the basic action. Color, line, texture, emotional dynamics. So this is getting rid of the mystery. This is what we have to tell the story. Okay? So with Cinderella Man, Renee's character has a moment where she says, this is all we have. We have nothing else. So my concept is that this family has fallen as far as they can. They have literally hit rock bottom. They can't go any further. So I decided to, as a result of that, I decided to put them in a basement apartment, in a stone basement apartment. Now, this isn't realistic at all. It's completely emotional. And that's what I wanted to do with the film. I wanted the audience to go on an emotional journey, not necessarily a realistic one. So again, using color, line, and texture. And when I say line, I'm talking about the size of the room. Is it tall? Is the architecture of it? Is it narrow? You know, it's about the space, the physical space. Obviously, if you have a smooth texture, you're going to have a different emotional response to it. So for me, on any job that I do, these things are servicing something in the script. And that's, for me, when I'm designing a project, not only am I dealing with the storytelling aspects of it, but I'm also asking myself some key questions. How do I feel? What do I want the audience to feel? what do I want the actors to feel? Those are the key questions. And that's what's running the machine. So the irony of it with Cinderella Man is that that apartment is not realistic at all. The courtyard is not realistic at all. But what it's doing is servicing the emotional dynamics. And the thing is, what do I want the audience to feel? Because I'm taking the audience on a visual journey. Okay? So, Ron Howard, as a filmmaker, is very conservative, likes to play it safe. So I had put together, let me see if I can bring these up again. Sorry. Okay, so that's, by the way, you see it snowing and there's snow on the ground and all that stuff. It's July.
Just so you know, it might take a moment, I think, to fire up again on the projector.
Is that what's going to happen? Okay, so I can keep talking. So there it goes. Okay, so we're seeing more of that. Again, we built all those structures. So I decided to put the family in a stone. This was a stone basement. And this was the initial white model. We built white models that we show to the director. And when you look at the apartment, again, this is the model that I built for the director. And, as you can see here, it's all stone surfaces. Not realistic at all, but emotionally correct. So I presented the idea to Ron. He kind of went along with the idea. Then I showed him the set when we were building it. And he was a little, he was a little nervous. Okay. So he said, well, show it to Renee. So, okay. So I remember bringing Renee Zellweger down to the set. And she walked into the set and she says, oh my God, it's so bleak. And again, I started explaining to her what my concept was, is that your family has fallen, they've fallen as far down as you go, because what we're trying to do is to increase the emotional stakes for the audience. And I said, you guys have, you have nothing, you've lost everything. But, what you've done, what your character has done, is tried to make this inhospitable space livable for your family, and the only thing that you've held on to are things that are important to you. And there's an armchair here, and I said, look, here, this armchair, that was your grandmother's armchair. And then I pointed out something else in the space, and then something really interesting happened. She went around the entire apartment and gave a history to every single piece of furniture that was there. And at that point, I knew that I was okay, because that actor has to live in the space. She's the person that really convinces the audience that the things are all right. So that's what happened with this. And then everything was fine. But it was an extreme choice to make for this film. And if you look at the rest of the film, it's fairly monochromatic. There's almost no bright colors in the film. All of that's very, very, very intentional. So
I think let's take the chance to open it up to the audience. If you have a question, don't be surprised. I will repeat the question because we're recording it and we need it for the microphone. But yeah, do you want to start? Why?
Oh, you always, I don't know where.
I just have to repeat the question for the recording. So the question is, why are those models white? Why do we make them white?
I think there are times on a certain jobs where you have time to paint them. But usually what you're trying to do is to get these built and made so that so you're just communicating information to the director and the team. So I don't know why. It's just a tradition in Hollywood. So you make them white. And when you have a lot of time on something, then you can come back in and paint it. But this one was the irony, what you don't see here is that when part of my design process, if I'm not, I do draftings, floor plans, and then I'll do elevations, but I'll do small versions of that. And there was this model was, I don't know what it would, we have a different scale system here. This was about this size. The initial model was about that size, and that was the one that I built myself, because that's how I go through my design process. Someone else came along and built this particular model. Okay.
Are there more questions? Just raise your hand. Otherwise, I would love to jump in on you've done a number of period pieces and have worked with all kinds of decades of the 20th century and earlier. And I was curious, you talked already about historical accuracy, which is such a difficult topic, I feel, in cinema, and I love how brave you approach it. But when it comes to a lot of these exterior shots, especially recreating historical places like Madison Square Garden in the 1930s, and then not being able to shoot on those original locations, but having to improvise in Canada, how do you go about that? How is basically, I feel like that's such a, just thinking of that, it feels so impossible.
Right.
And do you have a certain approach of how to go from era to reproduction?
Again, I think you do you start off with your research, which is what I did here. But this, okay, so on this in this scenario here, we had to recreate Madison Square Garden in New York at that time period was not where the present Madison Square Garden is. It was actually on 8th Avenue in the 50s. So I had my research, but I had to find a structure because I had to find a structure to recreate it. So I was lucky in the sense that this street that we're seeing here is the side of a very large department store. Okay? And the irony, it's the back side of a department store. And the irony of it is that all the windows that were there were already all closed up. So, and the thing that attracted me was that there's a train track there, which allowed me to have a trolley in the shot. But we attached all this stuff and we built all the period's windows, which I have anyway. So it allowed us, the thing that was good about it was because it was the back of the store, it allowed us to control the environment and to recreate the exterior of Madison Square Garden for the 1920s. Okay. Yeah, I want to see if I can. Go ahead, you want to ask me another question? I want to show you something else. Let me just find it.
In the meantime, yeah, we have another question, or two other questions from the audience, maybe first in the last row. Oh no? Or then over here? Okay.
Hi. In Austria, and I think in general in Europe, unless like you work in Great Britain or France, we have very limited budgets. So I was wondering if you always have access to sort of unlimited resources.
No.
Or if you don't, how does that impact your design choices and how do you go about that normally?
You design for the amount of money that you have, but these things here, color, line, and texture, are still part of my thinking process, and you just you adjust to whatever the amount of money is that you have.
So is that like a specific budget that you're confronted with right from the beginning, or is it something that you say, okay, I think this is what I need? Is it like where in the process sort of is that conversation happening?
Production will tell you how much money you have. Your line producer will tell you, and you're usually aware of how, and you have a general sense of how much you have when you're starting the job. I will, when you're doing lower budgeted films, usually that means that you're not going to be building a lot of sets. It's going to be run by the locations that you find. However, you still have to conceptualize the designs that you're doing and try and work within that concept. You still have an idea of what you're trying to do, and you're still trying to service the script. So I have generally, sometimes you do a really big budget movie and you still don't have enough money. It still becomes a problem. And then when you're doing a low budget film, your locations person really becomes a key collaborator with you because you're trying to solve the problem by locations. Right. Does that make sense? Did that answer your
absolutely.
question?
Thank you.
Thank
I know I realize it's a naive question, but
It's what?
it's a naive question, but I think
It's
we
not
just
a naive
operate on
question.
very
It's a
different
perfectly realistic
financial
question.
scales. Okay.
When we did She's Gotta Have It, we had Spike. We made She's Got. People don't know this. Maybe you didn't. If you guys haven't seen this movie, it was Spike Lee's very first film. It was made for $28,000. How much was that here? It's not.
That's like 25,000 euros.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
We still
So
had,
nothing.
so it was very. That's no money.
Yeah.
So, everybody was working for free, but we still had to find the right location that was going to service the story. So, you do what you have to do.
Right. Thank you.
If I can follow up on that question in terms of, right, I think I heard this recently, that no matter if you have a big budget or a small budget, you always have too little money and you always have too little time. And then it comes down to setting your priorities, right? And I'm very curious, when it comes to the world building, whether it's a period piece or a contemporary film, do you always, is this basically always your initial compass? Is the emotional impact on the viewer, on the actors, on yourself, or how do you set those priorities? Because I read that the streetcar that you used was like an old historic streetcar that was basically brought out of a museum to.
That's correct.
And I feel like, okay, that's a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money to put into that. And what if that money would have gone more into the boxing ring and to have different, and I'm curious how you make those difficult decisions and how do you get to this right formula of the world building process?
I think obviously each movie or each screenplay is very different. I did a movie called King Richard recently about the tennis girls. I don't know, Will Smith and all that stuff. That film that movie is a very, you can't interpret that film. You can't conceptualize it, because in order for the story to work, you have to keep it very realistic. So it's a very different type of design journey, because what's happening is you're talking to your director. Your director wants to keep everything very real. Then you're making a film about a real family. So you have advisors from the Williams family who are sticking around the set. And they don't want you to make artistic choices. They want to keep things as real as possible, which is what happened on King Richard. I kept trying to add some details that would help the audience know where they were. But the older sister, so I kept the house. We found a house that was very similar to the house that they grew up in. And I kept the furniture as simple as I possibly could. But I remember putting up just one piece of artwork on the wall. And I came back, and because again, even when by doing that piece of artwork, it was telling the audience something. She came in and she said, "No, we have to take this down because we never had any artwork on the wall." Now, the problem with that, and it was a problem, and I had an issue with it, was that if you by taking that piece of artwork down, the audience has nothing to see. Therefore, the audience doesn't know where it is, where they are. But that was the nature of the beast. So I had to, she was a bigger voice in the room than I was. So I had to follow her lead there. But there are films in which you are honoring the reality of the moment. And there are films like Cinderella Man where I think the choices you're making are all emotional choices. And you're servicing the emotional dynamic of that movie. That's what I hope you saw today. Something that, you know. So I'm going to show you something realistic now. This is Five Bloods for Spike Lee, which is a more recent Spike Lee thing. This is this is a Vietnam War film. This was an old ancient ruins that we had. So this was completely constructed from scratch, but I wanted to show you. Oh, you were okay? Hold on for a second. Yeah. Oops. Sorry.
And could you maybe full screen it?
I am. There you go. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Okay. Oops. Okay. So that's the set that we built, a big piece of it. Okay. This was the real place. That's what the real place looked like. So we went to Central Vietnam. We saw this location, took lots of photographs, and then the job of the art department was not to, was to recreate a version of this that would work for our story. Okay. So we shot this film in Thailand, and as I was scouting other locations in Thailand, I kept seeing these big, huge brick blocks. And it turns out that, so I remember asking the location, I said, what are these things? Turns out that these buildings was where they would dry tobacco leaves. So I asked him, my locations person, to, because I needed to build this enormous ruins, but I had a limited budget or a certain amount of money I wanted to spend, so I could only build a few buildings. So I knew that if I could utilize these, so that's what happened. They found this location, and so you can see these existing structures. And then I came back in and we built two really other big structures, which were going to be our primary structures for the film itself. So this is showing you the ground plan, okay? Now, in this sequence, it's supposed to be out in the middle of the jungle. The irony of it is that these structures were a half a block away from a big commercial district. There were like all kinds of stores there. But for the audience, for the viewer, you thought that you were in the middle of the jungle. But I just wanted to show you. So this is the floor plan that we did, showing the two structures that we were building, plus using these other structures. That's the drawing of the structure that we were going to be building. Okay. So this is all the stuff, and this is, I'm going to go through, you'll start seeing. And the thing is, it's stone structures that were all made out of styrofoam, okay? And I was working with an incredible group of artists in Thailand who I realized in many ways were the descendants of people who had built all the fantastic palaces there, and you'll see what I mean in a second. So this is a sample piece which I showed Spike. And look at the level of detail, pretty amazing. But you'll see, look at that. That's someone has sculpted that. So this is, I'm going to go through this. This is our, white thing, right? These are the other buildings which we're going to change. I designed things to go on top of these. So you see our scenery. That's the second structure there that we're about to build as well. Starting to paint it a little bit. You can see the second structure. This is all happening over a series of months, and then you can start seeing things are being finished. They finished that with structure there in the center. Look at that, the level of detail. Crazy, right? Sorry, what am I doing? Am I doing something wrong? Oops. It's not, okay, I did something wrong. Sorry. So you can see the level of detail. And as you can, this is what I did with those existing structures that were there. So, and the thing is, that this is a huge action sequence in the film. But so not only we had to be able to get on the ground level, but we also had to get up on the roofs. And this is the crew. That's the crew that did all the work.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Probably about.
Sorry, I just have to repeat it again.
Oh,
because of
sorry.
how long did it take to build those constructions?
Probably about about 10 weeks. Mm-hmm. Well, we didn't trim anything in the jungle. And if you were to look at the photographs very carefully, you can see them going through their natural transition. And we wanted things to be overgrown. So we just left them as it is, because we didn't want things to, we didn't have to, fortunately, we didn't have to come back in and plant more stuff. We just wanted, but what we did have to do is get rid of all the snakes that were in the area.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Over there?
oh, what, 5 minutes? Jeez.
10 minutes, 10 minutes.
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask something about your collaboration with the cinematographer or director of photography, as we have quite some cinematographers here, I think. And coming back to Cinderella Man, maybe, I, as a director, sometimes experienced really conflicts on tech recce's or in the prep between production designer and cinematographer when it came to colors, for instance. And I just wanted to know what about the colors of Cinderella Man and your collaboration and your talks with the cinematographer?
I chose all the colors.
You chose all the colors.
Okay. Again, I think this may be generational, and I want to be okay. So, you know what? Okay, I just want to. I'm trying to be politically correct here. Look, the important thing is that, in terms of the process, is that in the beginning of the process, is that I have very intensive meetings with my director. Because what I'm trying to do is to find out what's important to the director, okay? So I kind of think of this process as a triangle with the director at the top, production designer and cinematographer sharing the collaborative experience, okay? Because what happens is the production designer is giving physicality to the world. They should be, and then you go on location scouts, and the director approves those locations. And the cinematographer, if you're lucky, the cinematographer is there and participating in that process, okay? So the sets have to work for the cinematographer. Now, depending on who you are, because this is, again, the mythology is that the cinematographer, the reason I told you that story about Ernest Dickerson getting all the credit is because there are people who truly believe that the cinematographer, on a Wynn Thomas film, the cinematographer has nothing to do with the color. Nothing. And if they want to come and have a discussion with me about color, they're more than welcome to do that. But until the day comes when I can tell them what camera lens that they can use, they can't tell me what color to use. That's how it works for me. Now, your relationship, as a director, it's not even true as a director, This is something which I've noticed that's happening from a generational point of view, is the production designer is losing his or her power. That's not good. We're supposed to be making, as I said to you, we are the only people that take those writers' words and turn them into images. Then the director comes along and approves those images. Then the cinematographer has to come along and says, all right, yes, I can shoot here. Okay?
And maybe one last question.
Sure.
And what about the light concept? I mean, do you
Yes, now absolutely,
the light?
because again,
Yeah.
I will have intensive conversations. Whenever I'm designing a set, I'm always thinking about lighting, because it doesn't make sense to choose a set that can't be lit. Okay, I'm going to see if I can pull up an image here just to prove my point here. So I'm always thinking of, for example, in the Cinderella Man set, all the ceilings could be pulled out so that the cinematographer could hide his lights. Okay, so as a designer, and I have enough experience now, I am always thinking about how the set's going to be lit. Because it doesn't make sense, because as soon as if I go ahead and I do this lovely set and there's no way to light it, I'm going to be screwed.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to see if I can pull up this image, but keep going.
Because I would be curious how the color grading process then works. If you had already bad surprises when the cinematographer then in the color grading decided to change your concept, how is that something you are involving yourself in? Is that something you get to involve yourself in? The color grading in the post-production?
In post-production, everything's out of my control at that point. I mean, so all I can do is control the process while we're in the middle of that process. I just want to see if I can pull this up here.
And I think also to extend on Barbara's question, since we have also directing and producing students here, if there's, because we are slowly coming to an end of this session, we'll talk later again, but if there's something also you want young directing, cinematographer, production students to know about the dynamic between production design and...
All right, this is Hidden Figures. Okay? This is a big circular room. I see that thing in the middle? That a big light thing? That's for the cinematographer. I designed a piece of architecture that would allow the cinematographer to light the space. That's the collaboration. So that person could not come back to me later on and says, well, how do I light this? I've lit it for you. Okay? That's what a good designer does for a cinematographer. Thank you. Yes?
For this process, for this process, are you also then talking to the cinematographers like before designing the set, if there's like a special concept of light for a specific scene, or is it that you like give the concept and then they have to work in that with whatever lighting concept you've given them?
Generally, I will do the designing first. Again, it's not, you're going to hear this later. Again, you're thinking about all departments. You're collaborating with all departments. And I just pointed to EC because, again, I'm thinking about costumes as well. I'm thinking about how the work that I'm doing is going to have an impact on all departments. It does not behoove me as a designer to not think about how the cinematographer is going to light the set. I think early on in my experience, I had a couple bad experiences where I chose what I thought were fantastic locations, and there was no way to light it. So I'm always conscious of how the other departments are going to interface with the designs that I'm doing. Okay, and again, I use this as a classic example. I could have, if I had put a solid ceiling here, that would have been a problem. But now I essentially put something that they're essentially lighting this whole set, and they can lower the light, they can make it brighter, but I gave them the instrument to do that as part of the design. So I do that when I can. But what happens in the process is that you will have a meeting not only with the cinematographer, but with the electrics and the grips. And you will go through each set talking about how you're going to light it and collaborating with them. It's collaboration.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. I guess there's 3 hands. Okay, we'll get one.
Go ahead.
Hi, I wanted to ask which programs you're using for 2D and 3D.
Oh, you know what? Okay, here's what I say to this. I don't know how to do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm brilliant at hiring people who know how to do that.
Perfect.
Okay? I'm still doing things the old-fashioned way, which is still drawing and drafting in pencil, and it's a generational thing. And I have no interest in learning, but I do know how
Yeah, that's
other
fine.
people. I know how people do it. So I mean, I hire other people who know how to do all that stuff,
Okay.
and
yeah.
that is what people are using nowadays. But I think I have something here I can show you. Yeah, here. This is interesting. This is how that set started. That's my first rough sketch. The set you just saw started out like that. So, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I think here is another question.
As you started your career in the theater, would you say you took some benefits out of the theater that helped you in film?
Yes, absolutely. I think there is an element of theatricality to a lot of my sets, which come from the theater. If you look at all those early Spike Lee films, for example, they're filled with wild use of color and all that sort of stuff. And all of that's from working in the theater, because in the theater you're allowed to not always be related. But even with what you just saw, again, I put that family in a cave. That's a theatrical choice. You know what I mean? Imagine if you put them in a wall with a traditional kitchen with smooth walls. How do you think what impact that would have had on your experience? So Cinderella Man is filled with theatrical choices and use of color. But the audience still believes it. We are taking the audience on an emotional journey. That's what we're doing. Or sometimes we're following, we're taking them, it's the action, the basic, we're servicing the action sequence or something. But whatever we're doing, we're taking the audience on a journey.
Isis, did you have a question? Oh, no. No, okay.
We'll talk this afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Wynn. And we'll also have the chance to talk together later. But for now, please let's have a huge round of applause for Wynn Thomas.